Good afternoon, good morning. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Megan Stiefel at the Institute for Security and Technology, where I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer and the attempted moderator of today's conversation around what's going on with the latest activity from Iran-related actors. I'm joined by a great lineup of super experienced professionals who are going to be professionals on our conversation today. And rather than reiterating all of their terrific experience and knowledge, I will refer you back to the website where you can learn more about their backgrounds. In the interest of time, we're going to get into this. The plan for this afternoon, this morning, depending on where you are, is to talk a little bit sort of very narrowed in on what happened this week, what we know about the incident on a US company, and then take that conversation into a comparison to prior Iran-related activity and think about how this activity can be viewed in light of what we know about related actors' predilections, if you will, and then to really think about what we might anticipate next, both domestically, but also sort of in the broader context of what's going on. Finally, we will conclude with some advice around best practices. Spoiler alert, the recommendation is to begin with the basics and actually really do them this time, if you haven't already. But we'll get there towards the bottom of the hour, bottom of our 45 minutes. So I'm going to turn it over first to Alex to talk a little bit about kind of what we know about what's happened this week, and where we think this is coming from, what we know about the incident, and the like.
Thanks so much, Megan. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alex Merlins. I'm the head of threat intel at Sublime Security. I have a long background in Iran, so let's get into it. So, the big story, obviously, right now is Stryker, um, and its apparent attribution. Well, I wouldn't say attribution. It's been claimed by a by an Iranian nexus hacktivist front called the Handala, um, which throughout the threat intelligence community has been linked to operations that have also been conducted by an MOIS, that's the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence and Security nexus cyber threat actor in Iran that conducted the Homeland Justice related campaign against Albanian targets in 2022. That was a big lock and leak campaign. It was a different hacktivist persona, different oriented around a different point. Handal has predominantly emerged after October 7th, 2023. Homeland Justice is more focused on Iranian issues, while Handal is focused on Palestinian issues. They're both personas. And I think an important distinction that gets lost in this conversation very early is that just because a persona is claiming responsibility doesn't mean that the people operating that persona are the same ones that conducted the operation. More often than not, this is true for the vast majority of state nexus cyber operations. There were multiple teams involved in any given operation. And if there's a public relations side, for lack of a better term, usually that's a separate team sitting within a larger element. So they're coordinating internally. Um, Technical details have been a little muddy, a little mixed. Um, there's rumint if you look on places like Reddit, or you see people alluding to things in press reporting about possible abuse of the Microsoft Intune tool, which hasn't been confirmed by Stryker. Stryker's SEC K8 form just noted that, it wasn't a wiper, it wasn't ransomware, which wouldn't be surprising. Iranian tactics do often involve using living off the land binaries to deliver effects. It's not an uncommon thing. But in general, what we've seen is consistent with the sort of opportunistic, where can the Iranians find access to something that they think has thematic resonance with whatever grievance they're feeling at the time, and then attempting to deliver an effect that isn't necessarily strategic or tactical in nature, but it's psychological. So we're seeing here one company apparently has had predominantly IT network side effects. We haven't seen reports of any of their products being affected, so it's not cascading into ICS or OT, which Iran does have the capability to do, but being able to set it up on short notice like this is very, very, very different. And there's a lot of fear and FUD that gets pulled out of, oh, a medical device technology lost data, right? Because then people think the medical devices themselves are going to fail. There's a huge bifurcation between the corporate networks of a manufacturer and the operational networks or the platforms or hardware that their products are running on. Um, and I don't want to wander too far off the topic of the question, which was about who is this and why. And it really appears to just be this is what elements have survived because we've heard reports about missile strikes being targeted at Iranian government cyber facilities. Um, there's even been images of like IRGC, Cyber and Electronic Warfare Command paperwork, like in the rubble of different buildings. I've seen that on Twitter. Um, they're coming out of the rubble. They're trying to find something to do to contribute. It's not a Goddardammerung situation where they're trying to pull the whole world down with them. Clearly, the Iranian regime expects to come out the other side of this conflict. But as is tradition among Iranian actors, they're trying to inflict psychological effects wherever they can, and making a bunch of people in America freak out by hitting a medical device company is one way to do that.
So, Chris, I'll pull you in here because I know we were talking a little bit a couple minutes ago about a couple hours ago about kind of what's happening within the healthcare ISAC. And so I wanted to see if you have what your experience is from that vantage point in light of this week's events.
Yeah, Alex mentioned the Reddit source, which I think is where this broke for many of us. That was the first source shared amongst a lot of us in the health sector, and it took some time to vet that, right? Because it could have been anything. So for a few hours, as hundreds of messages piled up, we started to get a sense that this was more than maybe just a misinformation campaign, which is entirely plausible. I think hospitals began reaching out to Stryker independently for confirmation. They started receiving some signals from Stryker that something was going on, not necessarily knew what. So within a few hours of time, most had positioned themselves just to start a process of impact analysis. I mean, this is a lot of us had to become Stryker experts like within a very, very short period of time, right? And so I'm not going to sit here today and profess to be, all knowing of this particular supplier. I mean, hospitals are held together by hundreds of third parties. Like the healthcare supply chain itself is something like 4,500 plus entities outside of the 6,000 hospitals in this country. So that's a huge universe. You can't know how they're all constructed. Stryker is itself composed of, I don't know, 40 unique subsidiaries, brands. They are, in the top 10 of medical device suppliers. They are somewhere in the middle of that. By revenue globally, as a health sector supplier, they are in the top 20. Easily. I think but because of the diversity of what they offer, I mean, Stryker means different things to different hospitals, and so that early sort of asking your peers, like, how is Stryker impacting you? That is like just such a different thing from hospital to hospital. I mean, some are again, in terms of what Stryker's supplying to hospitals, it's medical surgical equipment. It's the implements you use to perform surgeries. It could be the table you're performing the surgery on. It's it's probably the bed you're going to be in after the procedure. They are one of the preeminent names in orthopedic surgeries. They produce an incredibly popular surgical robot that is a key part of procedures like shoulder, knee, hip replacements. They are in clinical communications. I mean, it is just a diverse spectrum of impact, and so we've forced ourselves to itemize all of these impacts. It's not, I think we learned early, it's not as simple as just stumbling through our environments and looking for the name Stryker. It's deeper than that, and we're not operating with public information, I think, which is to be expected in situations like this. I mean, the level of transparency, expectedly so, is not great, right? And there are lots of reasons for that. And so, there are a lot of risk-based choices that hospitals make in the wake of things like that. And so while this attacker maybe did not intend to directly manipulate medical devices. Let's focus on the surgical robots, for example, because those are very, very popular. There are thousands and thousands of those across the planet. It's there are hospitals who have taken those robots offline as a matter of precaution, which is completely understandable. I mean, we have two charges: patient safety and continuity of operations as a hospital. I mean, those are the two most important things in our world. They drive everything. If either of those are in doubt, we have to make just very, very frustrating and challenging choices about lines of care. And so I know some of those have been taken offline as a precaution in the absence of deeper information, and that has a downstream impact to patients. There's no question. I mean, you're delaying care to folks who've been depending on that, and that is just a frustrating outcome, whether intended or not. It's real. So,
Yeah.
the press of the red button did not take them offline magically, but as a downstream consequence, your hospitals have taken those off the board and sort of in this kind of self-imposed, denial of service.
So just to take a sidestep for a minute here, I think the idea of a self-imposed denial of service obviously is a perhaps ideal outcome for the threat actor, but we don't actually know that this was their intent. Were they trying to be opportunistic, or were they opportunistic here, or was this a targeted incident? And I think there's a range of reporting on this, but Jason and Alex, I don't know if you want to which one of you wants to weigh in on this piece?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a pretty consistent pattern with them throughout their history as a set of state actors, going all the way back to, I think it was early 2014, the DDoS attacks in the financial sector, right? For those of us who
2012.
are 2012. Well, and then there was another set in 2014. I remember that because I had just gotten to Fort Meade 6 months earlier, and and there was a lot of concern at the time in the government of like, what are we going to do about this? And we're like, we're not going to do anything. Like they're giant banks, and like they're just going to throw money at it, throw money at Akamai and Cloudflare, and like CDN goes burr, right? And so they were able to overcome that. But when you looked at some of the stuff they were DDoSing, it wasn't what would actually cause bank customers to be scared or frustrated, right? They were DDoSing public websites, and it's not going to affect like ATM services. And then over time, more things, right, going against water treatment facilities, and just kind of seeing the art of the possible there, and making us very nervous about what they were possibly doing and what the outcome could be with water treatment. The Proud Boys stuff during the election a few years ago, Saudi Aramco, right? Some of these were big successes. Sands Casino, wiping out the network at Sands Casino because they didn't like what Sheldon Adelson had to say. But the pattern still goes back to largely opportunistic and largely focused around what kind of media coverage they could get. And we've even seen this on the espionage side to a degree where, they will give, especially one of their contractor actors, go after the DIB, right? Go after the defense industrial base, just go get into defense contractors, and they go in there and they will take any file that isn't nailed down, and you're just trying to do a damage analysis, and you're going through reams and reams of, totally worthless data for, I would argue just about anyone, but definitely for a state actor to steal. And it's because they were just grabbing what they could and seeing what they could make out of it. So Alex and I had a great conversation about this the other night, that, we're of the opinion that because they believe the regime is going to survive, they're going to focus on things where they can develop access quickly through phishing or hitting something that's publicly exposed and vulnerable, and trying to pivot inwards and just do something dramatic.
Yeah, I think it really is. This feels opportunistic. So for between in the early 2020s, between like 2019 and like 2022, 21, there was this big shift in Iran's like effects delivery approach to cyber, where it went from something like Sands or like Saudi Aramco, where there with Shamoon, where there were these very targeted, all right, these particular people have pissed us off, so let's inflict some punishment on them, to who's been dumb enough to leave an unpatched device on their system where if we were able to deliver any kind of janky effect, we could get press coverage. Happens a lot in Israel that, all of the, and that's some of the, oh, we're looking at your security cameras or whatever is part of that. Some of it's proven, some of it's not. The Handala persona has made, I think, like over a dozen claims since the bombing started, and Stryker seems to be the only one that's been borne out through any kind of corroboration at all. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that there's going to be inflation around all of these. From what I've been seeing in the community, from what I've been reading in press reports, it feels like this was an access they either were able to get quickly or something they just had moldering around and they were like, oh, we can do something with this, as opposed to Stryker is important to hospitals at this scale. Let's scare people on that. It was
Right.
just, well, we have a thing. And I
Well,
think that then I think to Chris's point, I think that the self-enforced denial of service is their best possible outcome in terms of getting to actually disrupt operations.
and that's where I think, like, where are they going to go next? I think they're going to, again, if they were focused on regime survival, they would be using some of their good espionage access to like we'd see them burning defense contractors, and they're not doing that. So
Yeah.
what are they going to do? They're going to go after what they perceive, probably correctly, as their soft underbelly, and that's always been the things that we as Americans tend to traditionally neglect, right? Education, local government, which in public works like water treatment, and healthcare, right? And they're going to abuse those industries and try and get the headlines.
Yeah, we've been sort of beating the drum, I think, since Iran began. Attack surface management is the most important thing, the most important investment of your attention. And um, it's never not going to be true. But there was something about the specter of known TTPs of Iran Nexus adversaries, like, oh, okay, they have destructive tendencies, and so it's likely um, we should look at it, for example, our external attack surface, revisit assumptions we made, revisit accommodations we made. Um, you know, that's always valid. It's no more valid now. I mean, but I think what, how do we catalyze action here? This is the event. I mean, this is the dry run, guys. Like, this is worthy of your attention. It really is. Um, the fact that we can't properly scope the impact in a short period of time. Okay, it's not going to be practical to know the subsidiary of every one of our hundreds of suppliers, but we need to have a framework in place to get to those answers really efficiently. Like, I have that information now, but it's because a good friend of mine went through some like SEC information and sort of amassed this, and they did a great job, and it was really efficient. But we're not all operating with that same process, or we don't all have a friend who's going to slip us that list, for example. So, this is the time to tighten up the run book. This is the time to check the locks on the windows. I mean, this is restating really what's been said about what probably happened with Stryker. But yeah, they slipped in through the open window. They opened the door for themselves. Um, there is a claim that they took an awful lot of data. That has to be borne out. We have no way of substantiating that. It's something like 50 terabytes of data. This, I mean, it's very frustrating to the health sector because the nature of that material, the sky's the limit. We have no idea. I mean, is there further access to be gained into health sector partners as a result of information like that? There's so much we don't know. But yeah, this is the lever. I mean, we lack a lot of levers in healthcare. That's what I've learned. Coming from over 10 years in support of U.S. Navy, where it was comparatively easy to enforce security. I mean, the federal government tells you what to do. Here in the hospital world, we're sort of we call it selectively regulated. Some facets of what we do are have very strong controls, and other areas, mostly in the supporting technology piece of a hospital, are kind of up for grabs. And so we lack levers to compel people to take action. Well, I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation today is the lever. I mean, I hope this catalyzes at least one person listening to take this more seriously than they had. This is, you need to sort of jump on this, like a virus, and spread this word.
So you mentioned, Chris, the suspected exfiltration, or maybe it's a known exfiltration about a large amount of data. And in addition to kind of thinking about the opportunistic tactics that Iran has leveraged over the years, I think there's a question around what might they do with this data that they have exfiltrated.
Oh,
So,
well, I think others on this call will
yeah,
know very well what they'll do with it. They will commoditize it.
yeah. So in terms of commoditizing it, Jason, do you want to spend a minute sharing with the audience what they might do with that money?
Yeah, I mean the most obvious answer is they can just, sell it in some dark web marketplace, and use the money to help, further finance their operations. That's the simplest answer. They could, on the little more of the creative end, and I'm not giving them any ideas here because, these are things that have been seen in other areas. They could selectively leak it and use it to extort the company, and again kind of create that public spectacle things. They could use it to, if it has sensitive patient data, they could start, leaking that out. There's even a possibility, again, it depends on what the data is, right? As Chris pointed out, like, A, we need to verify it actually got stolen, and B, if it is 50 terabytes, that is a lot of data. And so what's in that? Does it have, documentation on how to access systems at other hospitals? Could they potentially pivot off of it and use it for onward movement? And this is where, again, I consider myself an AI realist, but here's where something like having access to AI, and it doesn't even have to be the latest and greatest, and doesn't have to be something that's necessarily hooked up to the internet to where Anthropic or OpenAI could catch the usage. It could be some DeepSeek running on locally, and that's good enough to sit there and go through it and parse that data and kind of give them some, they give it their potential use cases, and it'll tell you, like, right here, like this chat, this is potential for onward movement. This is potential for this kind of extortion, for that kind. Has this high sale value. And so just being able to parse that, especially if English isn't their first language, rapidly at scale, like that really, really helps out some of these actors, right? It's a force multiplier. So yeah, it's deeply concerning.
I'm gonna slightly disagree with the group a little bit here in terms of how I think they're going to exploit it. I don't think they're going to sell it. I have not seen an Iranian actor engaged in this that engages in these tactics sell the data with the sanction of the Iranian government. Jason and I, when he was at Cybercom, we watched one group try and sell some data from a
That's who
series.
I was thinking of.
Yeah, but remember they got their hands slapped pretty hard for
I
that.
remember.
Um, I think the two most likely outcomes are selective leaking. We've seen that happen with other operations attributed to the parent organization of this persona. It's happened with Homeland Justice. Just the other day, the Homeland Justice persona claimed to be leaking another tranche of Albanian parliament emails. So again, it's a very recent example of at least a claim, hasn't been substantiated yet. But they leaked from Albanian government networks for months after that campaign. And other actors have done that too. The whole lock and leak model that they were using for years was pretend to ransomware something, just wipe the machines and then leak the data after lying about being engaged in negotiations. They would claim that they were in negotiations. They would even do some sham negotiating, and then they would leak stuff anyway, just to try to create some plausible deniability. I think access development is the most likely thing they'll do. I think Stryker does have government contracts. Stryker does have relationships. It's in a supply chain. There are ways to exploit that. You can find ways to, especially with AI now, you can craft phishing messages in that regard. And that's one thing that we've seen over the last year was AI improving the quality of impersonation related phishes, especially within supply chains, within vendor supply chains, is a big thing. So I think access development or selective leaking are probably the two most likely next steps for whatever that data is, if that data did in fact get exfilled.
Yeah. And the only reason I put um, monetization on the table is, again, we are a little bit off the map here in terms of they just had their oil infrastructure destroyed, that kind of thing. So, but to Alex's point,
If
it's
we end
probably,
up in a space where Iran, because it's lost its oil infrastructure, starts cribbing from the DPRK playbook on remote
yep,
employment fraud and crypto theft, which honestly I'm surprised they never did in the first place.
Yeah.
yep,
Um, I mean that means a whole bunch of actors have to adapt, but it also means we as defenders have to adapt.
yep, yep. And again, their primary target for a lot of this, where we have seen them monetize in the past with some, petty crimes, stealing credit cards, that kind of stuff to fund operations, has mostly been against the Israelis. They tend to do, and really it's not the state actor, it's not the actors who are actual members of the IRGC or MOIS, right? It is the contractors who are trying to supplement income, where they'll do like theft of credit cards and that kind of thing, and to sort of self-fund. And what's the phrase, Alex? Augment, not augment
Augment their income
revenue,
streams.
augment their income streams. Yeah.
So I do want to spend a couple of minutes, since we are 1 week out from the issuance of this administration's new cyber strategy, being a little bit, we can pretend to be wonky, or we can be wonky, and think about, I think we are all students of various cyber policy doctrine over the years. This strategy notably does not name the usual five or usual four, but a couple of you have. So Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. What do we think this activity, sort of on the heels of this policy promulgation, will do? Kind of how will the conversation change, if at all, from um, before, sort of last Friday to Wednesday of this week? Do we think it will significantly shift day-to-day operations for U.S. Cyber capable actors, or not?
I don't think it'll mean much to the health sector. I'll be honest with you. I mean, the one thing we need more than anything is um, human bodies, like supporting our hospitals. I mean, across the 6,000 plus hospitals in this country, many still do not have a full-time security FTE. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, how are those organizations weathering something like Stryker right now? What is their level of awareness of this incident at all? That's terrifying. I am not intimate with the policy on the table right now, but I strongly doubt that it has language which addresses the resource deficit we have in our hospitals. So we will continue to row our own boats here, and the haves and have-nots will endure. That's it's a pretty sad state of affairs. But I mean, unless someone else here has read more into this, I don't see much on the horizon for our hospitals.
There's one point, the last point in it is about talent development and capacity development, but it feels regrettably, and then that might be something that would be helpful, but it feels kind of token, to be honest.
Yeah, the much has been touted about the offensive piece of it. That is clearly, when you read it, that is clearly where their head is at. And we even had a question in the chat asking us, will U.S. organizations be able to strike back? But it's, you know, to a slightly lesser degree, it's still largely undefined, unexplained in the strategy exactly how this will work. There's I'm not really hearing anything about implementation plans or about outreach to companies that might have the capability or capacity or desire to do these things. And so, you know, it could be the White House's desire, but if there's nothing to implement that strategy, then it just remains words on paper. And then as you go into it, to the point that Chris and Alex just made, it talks a lot about a bright future where we're resilient and we can, better posture defensively, but it doesn't even explain how we would get there. It just describes it as if, it will be brought into a state of being. And so, strategies are good for organizing your focus and prioritizing, but if there's no implementation plan behind it, and with the level of detail in it, I sincerely doubt that there is. Megan, I sent you an article earlier where somebody said that it looked like they had Grok or Chat GPT generated. It's just it all seems to be it's very fluffy, and it doesn't really give anyone any way to navigate a situation like this, and that's pretty disappointing.
Well, public service in this country is not fashionable. I would say it's
Yeah.
not what it was. So
Yeah.
if you're talking about language that sort of paves the way for kinetic response, cyber response, I mean, okay, that's still a public service function. Whoever's going to sign up to do that, why will they want to do that? We we talked a little earlier, Jason, about sort of the way the talent stream is sort of incented to move to private industry, if they had any cyber skill at all while working in defense, they swiftly move on to other things that don't directly support national defense. So I don't know how that obstacle is overcome. Probably not in a cyber policy for sure.
And I mean, it could be. I don't recall seeing any mention of it. But then, this, you have to go layers down, right? And so having someone like CISA supporting something, we had a question about the DEF CON Franklin initiative in the Q&A, supporting efforts like that, like building paths for people in cybersecurity professionals to volunteer, help out, devote time to help under-resourced sectors, that would be a huge help. Going to DoD, which has its Skill Bridge program where people can spend 6 months to a year, their last year in the military, working for the private sector, still getting paid by DoD. Basically, DoD gives away a year, up to a year of free labor. But where do people go, right? Everyone flocks to Microsoft, AWS, Google. I don't blame them, right? Like they want to go and, get good paychecks, but there's no incentive to say, I want to go help out my local hospital, right? Like that doesn't exist. You don't get more time. And so DoD could even craft its own internal incentives and say, hey, if you're going to go do one of these things that are public service oriented, we will give you more time, or we will do this extra thing to incentivize it. And it's just it's not in the strategy, and it's not anything that I've seen this administration lean into. And in fact, I would say it's probably closer to the nascent efforts that did exist. A lot of them have been dismantled either intentionally or as a byproduct of downsizing.
So we've talked a little bit about the opportunistic nature that we assess this incident to have been the result of. We've talked a little bit about kind of how these actors that we attribute this to have operated in the past, how they might behave in the future. I want to take a couple minutes here at the end to talk a little bit about, we've also talked about the fact that words on paper are a nice thing, but briefly playing the lawyer here, strategy does not change the law. And right now the law does not authorize industry to go off and hack back or anything else. So
Thank God.
I could say that again, Alex. I fully endorse that feeling, sentiment.
I do. I do want to just
Yeah.
note one actual nuance that came out of this strategy that I was stunned. I was reading it last night and I reread it 3 times to make sure that because I'm never going to hand anything to the people writing in this administration, writing these documents. I'm never going to say you got to hand it to them, but for all of their talk about imposing cost and deterring things, The way that they actually phrased it in the document was shape adversary behavior. And Jason and I have for years
Yes.
been talking about how you can't deter malicious cyber activity. You can't prevent it outright. You can only shape it. And it's not the same thing as and raising cost is not the same thing as imposing cost. And raising cost
Right.
is something that's proactive and it's holistic, and imposing cost is like punishment.
You redirect
Clearly,
the
this
energy,
administration,
Alex. Exactly.
huh?
You
Yeah.
redirect the energy to borrow
Yeah.
from our martial arts training. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And clearly, this administration wants to wants to inflict pain and whatever. It's not about the nuance of redirecting the energy and raising the initial cost. They want to be able to inflict some kind of vengeance. But the idea that the phrase shaping adversary behavior made it into this at all, I was a little surprised, because that is a more nuanced term that shaping as a cyber concept has roots in UK MOD doctrine, not ours.
Mhm.
Um, but then it pivots to the big quote is, "We will unleash the private sector by creating incentives to identify and disrupt adversary networks," which is the loosest way of saying maybe we're going to pass a law that lets private companies hack back. It doesn't address any, to your point, Megan, the fact that like no private company is positioned to understand how to do that um, in a legally safe sense, and to Jason and Chris's point, in an operationally meaningful sense. It's really just strange to see kind of saber rattling fluff actually include a really thoughtful phrase.
So I don't disagree with you that that is a thoughtful phrase. One of the comments or observations I had is that in order to shape other people's behavior, we have to change our own. And so that sense, I just to kind of draw things a bit too closer to a close here and thinking about what can our uh, audience, so to speak, do to change their own behavior, perhaps, or what behavior should they be implementing if they aren't already? What should they be turning up if they've already been kind of doing the best that they can? I previewed at the beginning that it's basically do the basics, but I wondered if collectively you each wanted to spend a 30 seconds or so on kind of where you think the most bang for your buck is in trying to be more resilient against what we know to be opportunistic actors who don't always, we can't say it's going to be the healthcare sector. So what can we all do?
Well, I talked briefly about attack surface management earlier. Knowing the composition of what you are advertising to the world, um, this is a time to again revisit assumptions about the way you do business with other entities and afford them remote access and provide access to remote workers. All manners of ways into your environment. This cannot be the shiny thing. I mean, it's exceedingly important, right? And it's really easy to spiral. And so to an earlier point that Alex made, the sky's the limit. We can seed so much fear and uncertainty about what's to come. At a certain level, we have to operate with what's in front of us and what we know. And what we know right now is this has a fairly high level of containment, and we understand there'll be downstream impacts that are sort of non-obvious. But there's the short-term kinetic impact. It's not like what we were all expecting, where you hit the button and a patient dies, for example. But to borrow a phrase from our friend Mr. Corman, we are dependable. We are dependent on undependable things, right? So instead of trying to find the next Stryker in our supply chain universe, we should focus more on some of these things that Jason was itemizing earlier. Other critical infrastructure components, which we stand to have almost no control over at all whatsoever. Water, of course, being one of those things, and prepare ourselves run book wise for the next operation. Again, we can't know the future, but we can train ourselves how to react to it, and develop a rubric for deriving information we don't have. So it's a lot of table topping right now, I think. But that's going to be some of the most well spent table topping we're gonna do.
So know your environment, exercise your incident response plan. Jason, I can see you.
Yeah. When I was at Cyber Command, I always made the point that whenever we disrupt an adversary, try to impose cost, even some of the long-term shaping efforts that we undertook, all of them were I don't want to say stalling tactics, but we were buying time, right? We perceived ourselves and we tried desperately to explain upwards and outwards that look, we're buying time for everyone else to get to a better place, to get to that place of good defense and good resilience. But the bottom line is, nobody at Fort Meade is going to come riding to the rescue. Like it's just unrealistic to ask them or expect them to. It's too easy to stand up alternate infrastructure and go. And so, you have to really focus on those basics of, do I know what I have, right? Do I have good attack surface management and inventory? Am I controlling and protecting my identities, right? My identity solution might, whether it's username and password or it's some sort of, card enabled or you have YubiKeys, it doesn't matter, but identity needs to be protected at all costs. And then, can you control your configurations? Can you patch those things? We had a question in the Q&A about insider access, and was this potentially due to an insider threat? I don't think so. I don't recall the Iranians ever doing that before. But the good news is that well, it's good news and bad news. But when someone gets a phishing email and they click the link and they compromise their identity credentials, what happens? Well, the actor is assuming your identity, right? It's now evil Jason at the keyboard instead of, slightly less evil Jason. And so evil Jason is, now running through your networks and causing havoc and exfiltrating data and all that. And so if your detection posture is around finding, and even better if your prevention posture is around, stopping evil Jason from ever taking place in the first place, then it doesn't matter if it's an insider threat or if it's someone who, managed to take over an identity. Your end result is going to be the same, and not enough people think about that and put real effort into that. IT safety up front and then solid detection and response, like you put those two together and you have the winning combination, but that requires investment and expertise and all these things that are just unfortunately in short supply.
Alex, you might get the last word here, but we'll see.
Sure. So Chris took the first point that I was going to make and made it infinitely more eloquently than I was going to.
Sorry.
I mean, the exploitation of remote facing services is still, I think, in my experience, one of the most common ways, especially for Iranian actors, to gain access to targets. But to piggyback off Jason's point in terms of identity compromise, a lot of Iranian actors use phishing. They still do. And one thing that we've observed is that most modern phishes capitalize on AI to pull on one of two different emotional levers, which is first is trust. They'll try to hijack what appear to be existing conversations or correspondence with somebody who you've previously engaged with, or they think that you've engaged with based on being able to monitor social media or other things or knowledge of your supply chain, or it'll be urgency. It'll be, oh, we need to do this right now for whatever reason. And that can range from credential resets to this executive is asking for these things. So one of the things that right now is if you have an email security solution is tuning it to be aware of those, but also as terms of users, now is the time that when something hits your inbox and suddenly seems like the end of the world, it's time to be extra skeptical of that. Especially if in the next coming weeks, also, if you have a relationship with Stryker, and if that data did in fact get exfilled, there could be data in there that could be used to craft things like this. And one last thing that I would just note that kind of underpins what we're talking about across all of the defensive things, and this is just one thing that it's going to feel remedial to the four of us, but it's going to be something that I just feel the need to say every time I can. Map your networks beyond just like attack surface management, but like have network maps and update them. Because the one thing that attackers always have a better version of than you do is a map of your network. And if you have
Every
a
time.
meaningful network map, you're going to surface the parts of your attack surface that you didn't know existed.
Thank you. We are at time, but I feel like we could carry on this conversation and take it in a number of different directions. So perhaps we'll have another chance to do that if you all are interested in carrying on the conversation at a future date. But we definitely appreciate your time, talent, expertise, and thoughtfulness. And I want to say thanks, and we'll close things out. Appreciate everyone joining, and unfortunately, I think this is not the end of the conversation, so more to come.
Thank you so much.